Shawnee.
Quick camera check.
There I go. Some setup, this, isn't it?
Right, cheers, boys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Sláinte.
Sláinte? Sláinte. We'll keep it pretty informal.
Okay.
Bit of conversation between the two of you. As I'm involved as little as possible, the better.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Lovely.
I'll steer you if you get.
You want us to just have an argument?
We don't like each
I wouldn't
other.
mind
you know.
it. I wouldn't mind it if you had an argument.
So that gives me hope, the idea of what we're trying to achieve, but also the response we're getting at the moment. I think it's time for change, and I think the moment is upon us when we can effect long-term change in this society. So I've got a lot of hope going forward.
And like me, I've never been prouder than my members. You've got to appreciate we've got a government against us. We've got some of the biggest multinationals in the world against us. We've got the entire country's media against us. And our members have said, you know what? We're prepared to stand up and bring it on. And as long as they're prepared to stand up, you know, how can you not have hope?
Mick Lynch.
Hello.
Eddie Dempsey.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
We're grand. A little bit hot.
Yeah, it is a hot day. I'm delighted to be joined by the pin-ups of the RMT
Jesus.
on a hot day like this. And I hope that slightly informal chat like this will afford us a little bit more time to be able to understand you guys a little bit better, your ideas, what informs your political philosophy in perhaps a way that the broadcast media doesn't necessarily afford.
Okay.
So, thanks for coming. First things first, how did Millwall get on at the weekend?
Drew. Clean point, that'll do for now.
Cork City?
6-1. Chelsea 1-0. Brentford 2-2. I've got a range
Three
of other
teams.
clubs to sort all of the audience.
Yeah.
Any club you want to name, I'm behind them. That's the way it works.
Well,
That's
I
how
live
you
in
get
this
to the
borough
top.
there, so I'm quite soft on the Arsenal. I like to follow the Arsenal, it's my son's team.
I was going to
And they're
say,
starting off all right.
because the other day you told me you're also a Celtic fan, right?
Yeah.
So a bit more Celtic this week if Millwall didn't get you the result you wanted.
Well, yeah, it depends where it's going. You've got to have options, haven't you?
Always turn to where there's a win. Where are we up to with the RMT dispute? What's the latest?
Well, the latest is we're still talking to the companies in all sorts of ways. There's no sign of a settlement or even a breakthrough. In some ways, it might be said it's getting more difficult. The companies are still putting up very severe obstacles, which are quite technical, but in the discussions we're having, there's no sign of them wanting to reach a compromise or change their stance. The train operating companies, which are the people that obviously onboard trains, our membership, have not even made us a pay offer, and the stuff they want to bring to the table is as severe as we predicted. They want to go back to driver-only operation, shut all the booking offices and all the rest of it. Eddie will tell you something about Network Rail, but the other thing is that the political climate has changed since the dispute started. We've got the rally of the right in the Conservative Party with the leadership selection or election, whatever you want to call it, which is driving that party to the right, and it will be very difficult to get a settlement this side of their selection of their leader, and it may be even more difficult after they've done that. We'll have to see how that goes and what their stance will be. And then you've got the general cost of living crisis, which has accelerated beyond most people's expectations, even people who are predicting doom, but inflation at 15% next year, probably, which will underestimate working class inflation if you look at utility bills, energy bills. It would be really hard to get a settlement at all. If you were in a 2-year deal, how could we do a deal for next year? We've got no idea what our members and other workers will be facing. So there's no sign of a breakthrough, so the action's still on.
Yeah, Network Rail, which is the biggest employer in this dispute in one company, they've had 2 offers made, both 2-year deals, both below inflation, both conditional on accepting a 50% cut in safety maintenance tasks on the railway, conditional on slashing thousands of jobs out of the industry, conditional on accepting much harsher working practices. Both of those have been rejected, and now the company's withdrawn its former proposal it made for a no compulsory redundancy guarantee and has started the formal process of redundancy consultation, a 45-day legal consultation period. So there's an escalation there as well. There's no sign of a breakthrough in that company. There's no more offers coming forward with better money, with compromises on any of the key issues. So same picture. We're in the dispute and we'll keep going until we can make that change.
What's this as well? Was it that I've heard about 39 weeks of nights?
Yeah. So in Network Rail, our members right now are committed to working what are called the higher rostering principles, 39 39.65. That means you work 39 weeks of nights, 39 whole weekend shifts, and then 65 individual shifts on top of that on a weekend too. So that's the level of unsocial, flexible hours our members work right now, and they work rosters that are 24/7, all around the clock. Some people start at 2 in the morning, some people start at 10 at night. So they're already some of the most flexible and unsocial sort of hours working people in the country. But they're saying that's not enough. They've got to have more ability to roster people to work more unsocial hours. There's a massive health impact on that. You know, if you work a lot of nights throughout the course of your working life, it tends to take about 10 years off of your life. And what the company want to do is make people work harder, work more unsocial hours, which is detrimental to your health. And they want to bring in a justifiable retirement age. So we had the government abolish a retirement age so they can squeeze every last drop of work out of people when they're at work. And now what they want to do is make you work harder and more unsocially so that you become sick or unable to work earlier in your working life. And when you do, they want to just be able to retire you without giving you a pound note on the way out the door. So that's the reality of what people are facing right now.
It's brutal. It's a brutal ask
Yeah.
as well for the workers, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mick, you'll have to forgive my language on this. Where the fuck is Keir Starmer in all of this? Because the last time I saw the both of you, right, it's on the Euston picket line, yeah? Sam Tarry comes down, he's doing his broadcast interviews, and by the end of the day, he's been sacked.
Well, Keir Starmer's scratching his chin somewhere in a bunker surrounded by Peter Mandelson and various technocrats, I should think. I can't predict where he is. But what he's not doing is asserting himself in terms of what he believes. Frankly, I don't expect him to be turning up on all our picket lines. I don't expect him to negotiate on our behalf, but I do expect him to sympathise, empathise and associate with working class people. So last night I was on Newsnight on a cost of living crisis thing, which was okay, there was too many people on it, but they had a front bench cabinet minister, or shadow cabinet minister, Debonair, And the question she was asked was very straightforward, but these people say nothing. They're just using up oxygen and time, hoping that something will happen and that the Tories will trip up. And I don't think that's going to be good enough. We're hoping and are trying to build a movement of change that people can identify with, working class people on the council estates, but also people on moderate and maybe going forward on reasonable incomes are going to face a crisis in this country in terms of energy bills, cost of living, food, mortgages, rents. And the Labour Party has got to find a way, and Keir Starmer's got to find a way to identify with everyday working class people's problems. And if he can't do that, he's going to fail. And that's what I fear. So we don't need him, particularly, the RMT. I've got to be frank about that.
We're not affiliated, right?
We're not affiliated. We will win or lose our dispute or get a score draw, whichever way it goes, on the merits of our industrial action and not much else. The mood in the country will help that. But if he wants to win an election and change the country, even by his own lights and his own measures, he's got to find a way back to working class people. And at the minute, he's not able to do it. And that's a shame, because we need him to win.
I watched that Newsnight interview, and you're right, there were too many people on it, but I watched Thangam Debonair, and she was asked twice, right, about nationalising, I think it may have been energy or rail. She was asked about nationalising industries and couldn't give a direct answer to the question.
Well, that is a direct answer. That means we're not going to do it, and we
won't admit it.
We can't think of a reason why not to do it. So if they believed in the free market or regulation, why don't you give an answer that says, I'm going to scrap Ofgem, I'm going to make a regulator work in favour of the consumer and not in favour of the employer, but we're not going to renationalise energy. If they wanted to say that, say it, and then you know what they're going to say. But I'm going to have the hardest-nosed regulator that you could think of that's going to screw these companies down, minimise their profits, and work in favour of working people to get a fair tariff. You could come up with an idea such as a living income tariff. So for people, any idea you want, people on certain incomes will get this tariff off any supplier. There's all sorts of things you can do, even if you're not a public ownership person. But you've got to have some message of some kind for working people.
You look at basically every single private utilities provider in the country, whether it's rail, whether it's water, whether it's energy, and it appears to be in crisis. And you kind of want some degree of like Mick's saying, positive policy proposal.
Oh, awesome.
Look at that for service.
Beautiful. Thank
Amazing.
You. Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers, Ava. It might, like you said, it might not have to be public ownership, but say something about it, and you kind of just get obfuscation and triangulation from them.
Yeah, well, at the moment, I don't know if there is a crisis in those particular industries or services. There's not a crisis for the people that own them, is there? They're making absolutely bumper profits. The crisis is experienced by people who have got to use them. That's where the problem is. And what's happening at the moment is there's a story being told about inflation in this country that's based purely on people's income. So they talk about the wage price spiral. They talk about we can't give people pay rises because that's going to drive prices even further up. But what they won't talk about is what happens with profits. What's the inflationary impact of profits? That's got a part to play. And prices themselves are not something that are just purely set by the market. You can have a say about what prices should be in line with what's going on in the economy. So if you've got a situation where prices are going up, but wages are being held down, all that's happening is more and more is being taken out in the form of profits. That is all that's happening. So what they need to do is cap prices on some of these key areas in the cost of living crisis and redistribute those profits into the form of wages so people can have a better standard of living. But that requires redistributive intervention in the economy and in society. And it seems that there isn't really an appetite from any of the political parties to do that. So we've got to create an appetite for that in the country because people end up falling for it. They hear, well, if I get a decent pay rise, that's going to drive inflation. Well, it's not really the case. There was a study done recently by the Bank of International Settlements, a working paper on the inflationary impact of wages across Western economies, and it showed the impact of wages on inflation at the moment is either zero or in negative terms. There's no risk at all of a wage price crisis. What they're worried about is people like me and him and our members and working class people who live on the estate across the road here having the ability to be able to bargain for better wages. That's what the real worry is, shifting class power away from the people making these profits to ordinary people who can get a better standard of living.
And if you look at those utility companies such as, I mean, what were there, 30 different providers or something, or at least in the mid-20s, electricity companies, with all sorts of wacky...
At least 30 of them knocked on my dad's door trying to sell a new
all sorts of wacky hipster names, but you were still getting the same electricity. Electrons only follow one law, which that's electrical theory.
Physics lectures now.
Yeah, and they all went bust. But none of those people who set those companies up suffered at all. Yeah. Some of the workers that work there have suffered. They shed their skin. They say, I'm an entrepreneur. I go off and I get into something else, some other kind of marketing process. And it's purely marketing. Nobody built a power station. Nobody electrified a different part of the country. There was no investment in that sector whatsoever. The people that have suffered are working class people who have had their tariff upped, transferred to another provider, which is a guaranteed provider by the state, and are now paying these utility bills which are beyond belief, even for some middle class and middle income people. So the victims in all of this are the consumer, which are generally people on key card tariffs and standard tariffs, which most people are on. And nobody suffered apart from our class, which is a really important thing. The same thing happens in the railway. When the railway companies get sick of not making profit, they don't go into a crisis. Stagecoach just walked out of the industry.
Hand the keys back.
First Group said to the government on Great Western, we don't want to pay for this anymore. You have the keys and you run the railway. The government said to them, we'll just give you £1 million a week as an interim deal and you can keep running it. They suffer no detriment whatsoever and they put no capital at risk. The idea about privatisation is you come in as a private sector provider, you put capital at risk, and if your business doesn't succeed, you lose the capital. So therefore you've got the right to more return, 10, 12, 15% return. These businesses they're running now get 1 or 2% yield, but if you're on £1 billion, £2 billion turnover business, you cannot lose. And that's what we've got. This is corruption in the broadest sense of the term. It's legalised corruption and skimming of the public purse. And that is going on all over this society, in the health service, in care, in education, in every public service you can think of. These so-called providers who don't provide anything, they just take over existing services and put a logo on it and skim money out of the pot and keep it for themselves. And when they can't make the appropriate skim, they say, you can have it back now, we don't want it. And that's what's happening with care.
Yeah.
If you take the care model, which is one of the most important services outside accident emergency, how
Ageing
you
population.
treat the elder population of this country and other people who might have mental health needs and all the rest of it, they say, I can't make any money, I'm just giving it back.
Yeah.
No, they never suffer any detriment. They never lose their houses.
It's the same with the people looking
They never
after
lose
our
their
kids.
cars.
In the care service, the kids being looked after there, they're like warehouses. The more kids you have, the more profits you're able to make out of it. But what's happening there, what he's talking about, that skimming, that is happening. It's the same for cleaners in the railway industry, it's the same for care workers, it's the same for people in the NHS in certain parts of it. What happens is, every couple of years, a contract is tendered for a particular service, and you've got all these providers who come in and bid, and they all undercut each other on price and deliver the same service at a lesser price. But they don't own any assets, they don't own any buildings, they don't own any materials after time. The only thing that they pay for is the labour bill.
Yep.
So what you've created is a system where every couple of years you've got a permanent downward pressure on the conditions and wages of people who deliver those services. And I don't know about you, look, if CEOs of these private care companies or CEOs of these private cleaning companies that run contracts in the NHS and in universities and the railways and everywhere else, if they didn't turn up tomorrow because of, I don't know, aliens visited and they were beamed up to another planet, everything would carry on as normal. If our people don't turn up tomorrow, if care workers don't turn up tomorrow, then we've got a real crisis. And that's where we've got to realise the social value of what people do. And these people do an extremely important job. They kept the country going during the pandemic. They looked after everyone in this country. And
Used to be key workers, right?
Yeah, so you got a few rounds of applause in that, but when it comes to putting your hand out looking for a pay rise, you get a slap in the face, or you get the government bringing laws in to criminalise any effort you might make to try and improve your life. It's
But
outrageous.
this culture of skimming and spivvery, which is an old word that you lot probably can't remember, but it
Gone
comes
bean.
It
Gone beanism.
comes from the black market in the wars.
That's it,
Spivs
yeah.
selling you dodgy material went right through the COVID crisis. So the PPE scandal,
Yeah.
where you could go down a boozer like this if you're a cabinet minister and say to somebody who runs a garage, can you get me £20 million worth of masks?
It's Matt
And
Hancock's landlord,
we
wasn't
just
it?
take that. It's been forgotten now.
Yeah, people just go,
It's
"Oh,
been
right,
lost.
we've been wrong."
These are massive scandals, which if you're in other European countries and other democracies, you'd never be allowed to forget that.
Yeah.
And we just roll on, stick out another celebrity scandal in the paper, move it on, politics rolls on, the media rolls on, and forgets the whole thing. In other countries, they'd be having parliamentary inquiries, they'd have an audit office that could pick all this up. These people want to lose their jobs in the cabinet, Matt Hancock and all that, so they can return to obscurity
yeah. Do you
think there's
and get a job in outside industry.
To what extent do you think there's a degree of collusion then between the media and
Well,
the
it's
political
obvious, isn't
class?
it? I mean, you see it particularly in the railway. I mean, how many times have we seen people come from directorships or high position jobs in private railway companies through the revolving door into the Ministry for Transport, back out again into some quango, then into one of the railway companies. I remember reading once, I don't know if it's accurate, it's just from memory this, but the actual franchise agreement for the company I worked for when I was a railway worker, Great Western Railway, the person who signed it off in the department, who inspected the documents and went, well, this is in order, we're going to sign this off, was the person who wrote it and then went back to the railway company, was involved in negotiating it, and then went back to the ministry, I think. I might not have that exactly right, but it was like virtually the same person who did all aspects of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And this deal was so bent, it was unbelievable. And what they do is they set a level of profit or income they're going to make from ticket sales, and they set it deliberately high, so they're not going to reach it. They know they're not going to reach it through ticket sales, and they say, well, if we don't hit that ceiling, right, and we don't make the ticket sales that we expected, then what will happen is the taxpayer will step in and just subsidise any losses that we might not have achieved, any profits we might not have got. So you just get a handout, and any profits you make over the top of that, you'll share it back with the DFT. I mean, that's a racket. That'll make the mafia blush.
But in terms of media, people think, oh, there's a collusion. So is there a memo that goes out from Conservative Party Central Office to the Daily Mail, the Express and whatever? I don't know. Maybe there is. They're called press releases, I suppose. But it's about alignment. So if your interests as the owner of the Daily Mail and the owner of the Telegraph are aligned with the interests of the privateers and the Conservative Party, you instinctively ally yourself with what's going on. So when they want to oppose us in the railway dispute, or they want to privatise water boards or gas boards or whatever it is, and continue that cycle even when it's failed, their class interest is that they're aligned with each other, and instinctively they can write media material that lines up against us. What we've got to learn as workers is that we need to learn those alignments instinctively and not go for this wedge politics. So when it's on LBC and the archetypal John from Grays in Essex rings in and says, well, I haven't had a pay rise for 8 years.
What should you do?
I haven't got shoes to wear.
Shawnee Union.
Why should a bloke in a ticket office get a pay rise? We've got to make it so that they don't think like that. And you know, media channels like this and other efforts that we're making has got to make that so instinctively people respond with alignment and identification with a struggle that's going on. Now, we've lost that. We used to get that when the trade union movement had less ability to communicate, funnily enough. And it was all more organic, and people had to be educated about it. But the way that the media's run now, it's all about I'm all right, Jack. It's self-interest, and that all stems back to the Thatcher project of you look after yourself, you buy your own council property, you buy shares in the utilities and all the rest of it, and the only thing you've got to do is look after yourself and your own, and everybody else is unimportant. Now, I think there's a turning point now. People seem to have got over that.
Yeah.
A couple of, maybe 2 or 3 generations have gone through, and they're seeing that this society is starting to fracture. And there is a definite problem and a definite perception of a problem by many, many people who don't necessarily think of themselves as socialists or political people, but they might believe in ideas like community. And community is a very strong concept. And it might come from people who've got religious belief, it might come from people who've got philosophical belief or whatever, or moral belief. But we've got to tap into that and not, in my view, not alienate people based on sectarian or ideological ideas. You've got to buy everybody into straightforward values of solidarity, which covers a lot of angles. That could be about your own personal circumstances in your personal life, or it could be about industry, sectors, or it can be about the whole of society.
There was a really interesting Vox Pop on the BBC last time you guys were striking, and it was like speaking to commuters, being like, "Oh, have you been?"
Oh yeah, no one.
You saw it?
No, I saw that.
Have
you
been?
A lovely bloke. I can't remember his name, but that lovely bloke, I think he was from Doncaster.
Yeah.
Well, he was an ex-miner. And they tried to get a Vox Pop off him having a dig at the railway workers.
Yeah.
And he was just complete solidarity with us.
It was like.
And then you had the other one, didn't you? Where they
GB
couldn't find a single person.
The cab driver. Yeah. It's like, have you been inconvenienced by the strike? Yes. But do you agree with it? Yes, I do.
But I think there is natural solidarity out there between people, particularly
right now.
Yeah, there absolutely is, and it takes a job of work through the media, through the methods that Mick was just describing, to drive a wedge in.
I've got to tell you a secret though, cab drivers love railway strike.
They do. Well, no, do you know the funny thing was, I was in a show.
Special tariff.
I was in a show, that's my icebreaker. When I've got a strike coming up, I'm in a cab. I go, look, how are you going to fare in this strike, mate? I was looking forward. I go, don't worry, mate, we'll look after you. But I was in one the other day, and he was like, oh, Jesus, I didn't do too well with the last one. I went, oh, sorry,
Yeah, I was asking you about the media in the Mail, because the Mail Online they've written some particularly interesting stuff about the two of you.
What are you going to expect? Well, here's a good example of it, right? He managed through hard work and hard graft himself and his missus to buy a small family home however many years ago when he was a railway worker, right? Now, like every other house in London, property values have gone up. Where I live around the corner from here, you couldn't buy a car parking space around here unless you're earning 120 grand or whatever, at least. So he's in the wrong because he's managed to try and get somewhere to live with his family. Fairly reasonable, all the rest of it. I live in a council flat, right, round the corner. I haven't bought somewhere to live, but I'm in the wrong because I haven't done it. So he's in the wrong because he has, and I'm in the wrong because I haven't.
The thing about social housing,
what are we meant to do?
It used to be as well that it wasn't, when it was bountiful, when it was plenty,
he grew up
loads
in
of people
social
lived
housing.
there.
Both of us grew up on council estates.
From different class backgrounds.
I didn't grow up in social housing, I grew up in a council flat. And there's a difference. We've got to get rid of social housing and get council housing.
Well, I agree with you on that. Yeah, we've got to get rid of these.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about your housing association. I grew up in a council estate as well. What was your borough?
Paddington, Westminster as it is now. Yeah.
Westminster as it is now. Yeah, I was Lewisham. Yeah, but it was the same thing. I grew up in a council flat. I live in one now.
Yeah.
I mean,
You were getting chewed out by Nick Ferrari over it the other day on LBC.
Yeah, well,
He's told me
but
I've got
that's
to move.
what they do.
He said
That's
you've got to move
You'd
to
be
the
evicted.
suburbs, yeah?
You've got to be evicted.
That's
I've
their
been
stock
given
in.
instruction.
That's
What
their
do you
stock in
get?
trade. But you've got to expect it. If you get sensitive about this stuff,
I'm not sensitive.
Yeah.
I've been shouted at
I-
by worse people than Nick Ferrari.
I bet you
tell
have, probably in your
though,
members'
to
meeting.
be fair, we do a fair bit of laughing about Daily Mail reporting on this.
Well, let's
Over
go
the
because I've got
years.
I've got some quotes here.
It's,
So
it's always good entertainment.
we'll have a little laugh about it.
Come on in.
You've been interchangeably. The first one's a bit quite soft. Rail barons, which you're probably used to.
Yeah, I find that one more annoying than most because,
Yeah. Oh,
go on.
well, because we are elected people. We've come from our union.
Yeah.
We've not been parachuted in. We're both railway workers, or maritime or bus workers. All of our officials are elected, and the best thing about it is we can be chucked out. Not many unions do that. And officers do lose their job in our union because they get voted out. We are so far short of being a baron. We are elected tribunes of the people, without being pompous. But
Well, we are. We think we're the most democratic trade union in the most democratic part of our society.
But what the other side of that is that our members are pawns, some kind of little tin
right,
soldier.
yeah, they've got no agency.
Me and him
They
sit-
don't understand what
Me
they're
and
doing.
him
Yeah,
sit
yeah.
there and go,
Manipulated by
we'll
you.
send them on strike next week, and they might lose their jobs, and these can go over the top. It's absolute nonsense. It
Field
comes
Marshal
our way.
Lynch.
It comes our way that
Yeah.
the members are booting us sometimes where we don't want to go, and we're sort of going, "Well, you sure you want to do that?" And they're saying, "Yes, we do. We don't have to drag our members into disputes. Our members are kicking us to
Send
get
you
the
that way.
dispute on."
Yeah.
Hard left is another one.
Well, I don't know. What would you describe as hard left? I mean, look,
By the Daily Mail standards,
by the Daily Mail standards, I mean,
democratic socialism.
That's a Pinochet's on the hard left in accordance with that, isn't he? I mean, look, Brendan Behan said he had a great view about politics. Anything that keeps the children fed, the beer cold in summer and the old people warm in winter. That's what I believe in. I just want to see people live a decent life, and I think they can in this country. I don't think there's any reason why they shouldn't do.
Yeah.
I live in a beautiful little community across the road here, and people around here are lovely, and I think they should be looked after. I think if you go out and work for a living, you should be able to take care of your family. You should have an health service that can look after you.
Mm-hmm.
You should be able to retire in dignity. You should be able to get your kids educated. You should be looked after when you're sick. I don't think that's too much to ask for in one of the most advanced economies on the planet.
And not in in-work benefits.
Yeah, well, and the other thing, the hard left implies that you belong to some kind of sectarian organisation, and that you've got a strategy that's delivered to you from an outside body. That's what they mean.
Yeah.
That we're under the control. It used to be Moscow or wherever.
Yeah.
Snow on your
That's
boots.
what was said when I was growing up in
Blacklisted.
the 70s. And I'm not that. I am an assertive, democratic, socialist reformist. And what these people can't handle is that some of the most effective militant trade unionists like Jack Jones, Joe Gormley, Ernest Bevin and others took on some of the most important industrial battles, some of the most hardline strikes that we've ever done, that built the welfare state and built the labour movement, were from a background that wanted more MPs in Parliament to win the battle, democratic battles, win elections and change society permanently. And that's what I want. It's just that the Blairite and the Brownite and the Starmerite and whatever you want to call it, Labour Party has gone so far away from that idea, the concept of assertive, constant reform and improvement, that they can't understand it.
No.
That a reformist democratic socialist may use the strike weapon and the strike strategy and industrial disputes to get to a position where we change society.
Just on that point, Mick, for people of my generation who might not necessarily be aware of the history of trade unionism and the battles that have been won and the rights and the services that trade unionism has won in this country, would you be able to run through a couple of the things that the trade unions have delivered in Britain?
Well, the whole idea of the welfare state, so the idea of a national health service, the idea of a pension in retirement, the concept of looking after people who cannot work, and I'm not just talking about the unemployed, so people with mental health issues, people with physical disabilities, having care services for them that are not necessarily the dole, as we used to call it, social security. But the very idea in the workplace of the health and safety legislation, holidays themselves, paid holiday, is a concept that the trade unions won. Public holidays, sick pay, maternity rights, statutory paternity rights, all of that stuff. But the protection of health and safety, which is probably the most important thing. When I started work in this country, when I was on the construction sites, there were 500 building workers being killed per year. 3 at the end, but in the 70s it was 10 building workers every year. Accidents on the railways were at a phenomenal level. Accidents in engineering were at a phenomenal level. Accidents in the agricultural sector. All of that has been bashed down by regulation, constant improved regulation in the Swedish, German, European model, social democratic model, if you want to call it that. I think that's a really good thing. It's very difficult for people to take away. And what they want to do is get rid of regulation. The libertarian right in this country and all over the world want to end deregulation and leave us at the mercy of the wolves of capitalism, which is what we've been fighting against. And if you go back to trade union banners, there used to be widows and children on it, and there would be wolves at their feet. And that was capitalism. And they were going to rip them to pieces. And the labour movement, all sections of the labour movement, the cooperative movement, which was selling things to you in your community, the trade union movement, the industrial side, the political side, which brought sustained change through law and regulation, and the cultural side, which has gone a bit to one side, which I hope will come back. 4 elements of that, literally from the cradle to the grave, because the co-op would bury you as well at a not-for-profit basis and send you on your holidays, is something we've got to rebuild, that we do it for ourselves and make alternative models. And we've got to do things like go back to the concept of public ownership itself, the community owning assets and industries and the distribution of the goods that they produce and the energy that's produced and things like that is good in and of itself, not just as an alternative to capitalism, but is a better model for people to exist within. So there's tons of it, and we've got to develop socialist ideas that are trade union ideas, not delivered by academics and ideologues from outside the movement, that come from within. Very straightforward. Some of them come from the Methodist Church, they come from Catholic social thinking, they come from Baptist thinking, they come from secular thinking within the working class. But they're not delivered by vanguard politicians, which is what we've had a lot of problems with, which just leads to sectarianism. It's got to be working class struggle and working class ideas that bring the movement forward, and I hope we can get back to that in a very strong way.
Yeah, well, I think, like, if you look at, from my point of view, I think working class people, as a majority of people in this country, ought to have the democratic control over their political life and also over their economic life. People should have a decision on who governs their country, and they should also have democratic ownership and an idea about how the country's run. Who's making profit out of energy or not? Who's building what housing in your local community? Who's looking after your family when they get old? Who's taking care of people when they're sick? These are all really important things, and that's the history of our movement. You go right back, you know, the whole thread of democracy in this country and around the world, if you like, comes from the trade union working class movement. It comes from the Chartists, the suffragettes, all of that history where people have struggled and fought against all kinds of attempts to try and keep people divided and stop them from having a say over their own lives. I don't think that's particularly radical. I think that's really the make-up, particularly of this country. Now, both of us are Londoners from Irish families, so we've got our own traditions going back in our own families, but I think that's a particularly English thing that the English working class ought to be so proud of. I think they've got one of the most beautiful histories out of any working class people.
Not radical history.
In the world. It's great, you know, from the Chartists right the way through.
A very distinct, organic,
extremely
British
distinct
tradition of socialism, which has been lost.
It's been lost,
so
yeah.
When the original socialists, Labour socialists,
I mean, the
were
old
saying,
Jews, they took it from
how
the
do we
penny
get control of
subscriptions from the
society? They
Methodists.
didn't think, oh, we'll give it to Parliament. They said, we will take control of the councils, we will create water boards, we will even create gas distribution boards, we will create educational boards, owned and controlled by the councils and by the county councils, and we will build and control housing ourselves. We won't give it to other bodies, we won't give it to housing associations, we won't give it to developers. It's a really important concept that it stays in the community, and when you've used it and finished and died,
you pass it on.
You pass it back to the community, back to the council under democratic control, and they give it to another worker.
And that's why we've got
These are
housing
really
crisis.
important concepts.
But that's why we've got housing crisis. You can either build houses for investment and speculators to come in and try and squeeze a pound note out of it, or you can build homes for people. But you can't do both. People go, we've got a housing crisis, we've got to build more houses. All you're doing is building more houses for people to come in and buy and speculate on and all the rest of it. We've got to actually build homes for people where they live in their communities.
Yeah.
And,
This is the important distinction between social housing, which is a corruption of what we need. So we had housing associations in this country in the 70s that stepped in certain areas. Thatcher and Thatcherism completely corrupted the idea of a social housing movement and gave it to these housing associations whose executives are now sitting on 600 grand a year salaries and have sold themselves completely to private sector developers and have ruined not only what social housing is, but even the very design of it, where everybody's living in a sitting room that's in the kitchen, and the ceilings are coming down. Under council housing, the specifications were much better.
Well, there's an example around the corner. There's an estate round the corner built there. Some of the finest housing. People were biting their arms off to buy the flats in there now. That was built with social housing, that estate round the corner, by Berthold Lebitkin. And they threw him out because he said, I won't build rabbit hutches for workers. A lot of social housing was started around here, and some of it was of such high quality. People, I don't know what you'd have to pay, £1 million or something to get a flat in there now, but those were houses built for normal people to live in the community.
The trouble is, this idea has gone out of fashion, and many young people don't understand the concept that in this country there used to be a housing sector that was about a third or 40% private ownership, owner-occupiers. There was a massive 40% council housing provision, and you could expect, even as a single person, to be given a council property eventually.
Without waiting too long.
And private sector landlordism was about 20%. And much of that was being phased out continuously, and it was a stigma to be a landlord. And we had this turnaround
Not
in the
anymore.
80s. We had this turnaround in the 80s with buy-to-let mortgages, stimulated by the government, including the Blair and Brown governments, that gave mortgage stimulation and tax relief to speculators and landlords. And in my mum and dad's generation, being a landlord was like being accused of being a gangster.
Well, it was a running joke. When my old man first came over, he lived up in Kilburn, like a lot of paddies when they first landed. But there was an incident where a landlord was thrown out of a window. And it was a running joke at the time. He broke both his arms, so they say, well, he only had two. That was the running joke.
Look, listen to what you guys are talking about right now. You've got a diagnosis of the problems in society, right? You've got a projection.
To some extent.
To some
extent. We
extent.
don't know everything. We don't know a little bit.
I'm not sure about that, mate. You got a projection of values, right? You know what you stand for, and you're verbalising those values. The next part is policy, right? And the two of you have appeared in this Enough is Enough campaign video this week, which looks to me like a nascent political movement.
Well, we think it's not a political movement. We think it's a platform for working class. Well, I don't know about political movement because people get carried away with these things. What we're trying to achieve.
Because just quickly, Eddie, you've got strike action as your industrial weapon, right?
Absolutely.
And you used to have the Labour Party as your political weapon.
Well, but before my time,
it's what we would call a social. It's a social movement.
It's a platform for working class people.
And it will probably reach into middle class people. Anyone that believes in social solidarity and ending this pay crisis, housing crisis, food poverty,
being ripped off for these
the
energy
issue, and getting decent housing. And housing is so important
to everybody. I know a bloke who's had his rent put up 42%.
It's a platform to enable the values that we've been talking about to come back into the public forum and into political discussion, to stimulate the politicians and create political activity. What it won't be is a political party. It won't stand in elections. And what it won't be is
you think that's what we're up to?
It won't be a sectarian organisation.
You might not mean it now, but
we don't mean it. Look,
it's certainly got a political aspect, and the people in it will have a political outlook. But it's got to be values based rather than this is a policy agenda, a 40-page manifesto. It's got to be more dynamic than that, and it's got what we've been saying. Myself, people like Dave Ward in the CWU. We will plant our flag and our values in working class communities all over this country with issues like this. Enough is enough. Very straightforward values, and we'll get to articulate them in speeches and rallies and whatever we can do, online communications. And then it's up to all those people that are interested to make those changes in their communities and find ways to politically organise. We've also got to teach people how to organise, what being an organised worker is, whether it's on your council estate getting the residents' association back, so that you get the renovations you need for underspending, so you can make demands about the local park, make demands about your local swimming pool and your library and whatever. We've got to teach people how to do that again, because a lot of it's been lost.
Taken off them, yeah.
And then when people have done that and they're successful or get stimulated by it, they will educate themselves and we'll educate each other and we'll roll on to other ideas. But what we can't allow is people who are parachuted into our communities to try to say, you need to do this, you need to buy this paper, you need to follow this narrow sectarian line, and somehow that will change society. Because the lesson is that will never work.
I was telling
So
Mick,
that's what it's about, a platform, not a political party.
I think I was telling Mick.
He doesn't believe this, does he?
I went down to where I grew up, the same block of flats I grew up in. My old man still lives in there, he's retired now. And when you go in a dilapidated lift shaft to get up to the landing where he lives, there's a notice board. And in that notice board, there's a clapped out, faded poster from like 2002 or something like that, Liberal Democrat. And that was the only time anyone ever came near the place. Right? That's like 20 years ago. It's still there. I went down there the other day. No one's been back since. So I want to make sure that we're getting a chance to try and speak to people who've been left out in working class communities, on the council estates, in parts of the country that no one cares about because they regard those people as non-voting and all the rest of it.
Useless,
and just give people the chance to stand up and say, well, I'm not prepared to have this. I don't want to see a situation where I'm working half a year to just pay for the electric in my house.
Absolutely.
I can't afford to look after my kids. I've got no help where I need it. I've got no local services.
If we take
We've
two
got to change
things,
it.
how to get a pay rise and how to deal with fuel poverty.
Yeah.
We need that immediately. So people do need a pay rise now. So they need the solution to the cost of living crisis in two ways. Fuel prices have got to come down.
Yeah.
And so in order to achieve that, we need people on the streets.
We
need mass protests
and introduce
about
a pay cap.
changing that. So we need to take that fuel cap downwards. So, and that is a very direct tax on the companies. If they say you can only charge this amount, no matter who you are, you've got to introduce a low-pay tariff or a workers' tariff or whatever they want to call it. We can make any government do that if we get enough people out.
Yeah.
Right? So we've got to get those solutions now. We cannot wait for a political party to win an election, which could possibly be 2 years' time.
I'm sure they're going to wait.
And then legislation will have to come through 18 months after. We'll all be down on our uppers. And the danger is, if we don't get a solution to this, we could have now a cliff edge recession. Because if you've got to save up to pay your gas and electric bill, you can't buy enough food, you can't clothe your kids. Everyone's going to turn off the taps, they're not going to spend any money, they're going to stay at home, and the economy's going to go into lockdown, which is caused by economic hardship, even for people on good salaries.
Well, have you seen about this Don't Pay UK campaign group?
Yeah.
I've seen that. I mean, look, that's not a campaign I'm directly involved in. I'm working on the Enough is Enough campaign with Nick and Dave Ward and others. And I come at that from a bit of a different perspective because people I know, including myself, I've got an electric key. It's not about don't pay. It's either you put money on it and pay in advance for your energy,
you've got no lecky.
or you don't turn the lights on, you don't turn the cooker on and feed the
So
kids.
the people that are most affected by this
you've got to be careful.
the lowest paid people who have got keys. And if you don't put another £10 on it,
you
won't be entitled
to
to cancel your direct debit.
The
meter just switches
They're
your
not going to turn around
electricity
and go,
off.
this person's protesting.
All your food is going to defrost, and you won't have any electricity, possibly gas in your house. So it's a slightly middle class concept. Cancel your direct debit, or change your direct debit, or write a angry letter, and that will mean they've got to put you through the ombudsman. I don't understand it all. We need more instantaneous responses. We need people not being cut off.
I mean, the reason I
and we
don't
need
like it is
a
because it's
dynamic programme of resistance.
I don't want to slag people off, but what it feels like to me is putting the responsibility on people that are suffering in the middle of this cost of living crisis. The responsibility for energy prices sits with the government and the companies that are charging these prices. That's where it sits, and that's where the solution to the problem is. I don't want to dig out another campaign that's got some very noble aims and is working hard to achieve that. But I think, things are wider than that. It's not just about energy right now. At the moment, it's about people who have seen their wages falling for 30 years, right, for a start off. Your wages now are not what they were 30 years ago. You can't buy the things you wanted. People aren't able to, they've got prices going through the roof for a start. They're not able to keep up with that. We've got a crisis in housing where people can't afford to live. I mean, I was telling Mick, I used to live around the corner here about 10 years ago, more. I was spending £1,750 a month rent then. You can imagine what it's like now for people in this city. You know, it's crazy.
But honest enough is enough. Just to finish,
out.
while we're on, we are going to be running rallies as soon as we can all over the country. There's going to be big rallies, there's going to be small rallies, there's going to be online events. So we want this to be a wave of campaigning and a wave of ideas and getting people out there, not just sitting at home moaning. It's no good being alienated and pissed off. You've got to find a way to organise and effect change. So that's what that's going to be about. But it can't be mired in the traditional left-wing stuff.
No, and it's got to be available for everybody.
You've got control of it. Let's have a breakaway from enough is enough.
No.
Enough is not quite enough or something. We can't have that. It's got to be dynamic.
And it's got to be available to everybody. Yeah. And that's the thing. If anyone sees it and goes, I can't pay my electric, my wages are too low, my landlord's ripping me off, any of those problems you're facing, I've got to go food bank, I'm worried about my kids, they need to sign up to the campaign, because we're going to create the platform and the opportunity for people to come out and make real change in this country. And that's what we've got to do. It's immediate stuff. So it's not some long-term scheme to replace the Labour Party, I'm sorry to tell you. It's about trying to achieve some very, very important things right now, but create the ability for people to organise so they can pass that on.
I'll be frank with you, we want to kick the Labour Party into a position where they have to follow enough is enough. We want to make the TUC go there, we want to make the trade unions go there, we want the Green Party to go there, we want the Liberals to go there. And if you can get that kind of dynamic campaign, I don't care about the rest of it. The election will sort itself out. But if public opinion and public campaigning goes to these straightforward ideas that everybody's being ripped off by the current society setup, that will be a dynamic change. People will do what they want when they get in the ballot box. That's up to them. But if you create the conditions that there must be a change, then the election will be the election. What we've got at the minute is this drive to the right, where we've got two politicians saying we must have tax cuts. I've not met anyone, any of our members or anyone that's come up to me and say, Mick, I like what you're doing, but you've got to get beyond these tax cuts. What we've got to do is get a tax cut. Yeah. Nobody's come up to me and said the country needs tax cuts.
They go, look,
everybody understands.
My landlord's put the rent up. I ain't had a pay rise in 5 years. Yeah. What I need right now is a tax cut.
But everybody knows that you're not going to get an operation if they cut taxes. Your elderly parents are not going to get care.
Has this summer
your kids aren't going to get a creche or whatever you need.
It's felt like a bit of a fever dream, right? Like months, right? It hasn't rained in London. The whole city was on fire about a month ago.
All of the firefighters.
Yeah, absolutely. All of the things you guys are talking about, and then you tune into the news or you tune into a politics channel, and it's tax cuts.
What drives me mad is last night, Mick's on news night, and me and my missus, of course, were sitting up and waiting for Mick on the telly. Here he goes. Big fans, we tune in.
Nothing to do.
Popcorn.
Nothing better to do. We go, let's see who he's up against here. And, you know, we've got all these people on there drowning the message out, sort of saying that. But then they talk about the cost of living crisis, but the one thing they don't mention is wages.
Yeah.
Now, wages have been falling for 30 years. We're in the sharpest fall in living standards out of any of the G7 countries, any of them, right? Wages have not kept up with inflation for 30 years, and the only thing they don't talk about as being a factor in the cost of living crisis is people's income. And you think, well, hang on, if you've got more money coming in, that's the start of solving the problem with the money you've got to spend going out. But they just want to either ignore that completely and pretend it doesn't exist in the media, or they want to try and demonise anyone who's looking to try and achieve it. And you've seen that in all the media interviews we've done. They go, I support people getting a decent wage, but how dare you try and do anything about it? And you go, well, hang about it. I only support people getting a decent wage and people fighting to get that, or you don't, you know? So that's the issue. Wages are crucial in this, and we can't let people off of that. You know, we can't let people off of that.
To try and press you a bit, Eddie, if you cut tax, right, does it not put more money in the pocket of your members?
Well, it does. All right, so look, let's play the devil's advocate here. It puts more money in people's pockets. Is that not inflationary impacts?
It's short term, though.
Short term, I mean,
all of the services that you pay for will be cut. So a service you may need or a benefit you may get, they'll work that out, that they'll get that money back by other marginal tax changes.
They'll get it
on
back.
Things like duties and VAT, which they always attack.
With
VAT
prices are
is
going
the
up,
most
so is
regressive
VAT.
tax, and they never touch it. It bears more on working class people than the rich. VAT on a product, if you're a single mother, is the same if you're a billionaire. And it's unfair, it's regressive. We've got to tax the rich. We've got to tax people who don't pay tax.
But here's a really important thing.
Don't pay tax. It might
Here's a really important thing. What
people
they do
driving
now,
around in Bentleys are not paying tax. We pay it through PAYE.
We've got a whole economy set up to subsidise profit taking out of the country, right? So we've got millions of people right now working every day of the week that are on in-work benefits. We've got people paying rent who are on benefits, even though they're working, to pay their extortionate landlords' rental fees, right? We've got people being subsidised right across the economy. And what that is, it isn't help for workers in reality. Really, it's just to subsidise employers so they can get away with paying wages that are so low, people literally can't afford to live in this country. Now, I don't know what the wage bill is if you took all of that into consideration on behalf of the government. But I would suggest it's a lot, and we shouldn't be subsidising profits in that way. What we need to do is redirect that into the form of wages, and it's the same. It's just a crazy amount of subsidy when you look at it in that point of view. They keep wages so low that people have got to go and take benefits whilst they're in work to survive.
Subsidising poor employers.
That's in reality what's happening. They're quite prepared to keep people's wages so low that the state has got to step in and give them benefits so that they can survive. And then you've got the pumped up credit economy. You've got people, you don't hear about them so much now, but we went through the Payday Loans, remember that?
Yep.
I remember doing it. I did a
They're gonna have a
survey.
field day over the next
I did
few
a
years,
survey of a group of workers I was organising a few years back, and nearly 90% of them were either right now in debt or were in debt in the past 6 months to a payday loan company. Every single 100% of those workers were on in-work benefits. Something like 70% of them were receiving housing benefit at the time. So we're subsidising low pay so private companies can make more profits. That's the real scandal.
The remarkable thing, we spoke about corruption at the beginning. If you take your middle income person who's on whatever, 40,000, they might have a second person in their house earning 20,000, so they're on a good salary, they pay tax PAYE all the time.
Yeah.
Before they even
They
see
don't
it.
get benefits, and they're going to be paying these really high utilities bills. They will have to pay these taxes so that the state can then subsidise poor pay, right? And the people they work for will be making massive profit. So the PAYE mug, which is the majority of people, is having to pay higher taxes to subsidise companies.
The rest of the people
who rely to make their profits on people receiving the subsidy that the taxpayer has to pay those benefits. If they paid the people properly to do their work on a living income or a living wage that was a real living wage, which in London today would be £15, they've worked out, not the living wage we're paying, you wouldn't have any in-work subsidies. And the middle income taxpayer would probably have a lighter load because they wouldn't be subsidising these rip-off companies that we've got around. So it's a pernicious circle of companies living on state benefit because that's what pays for their employees.
We're getting towards the end of our time together, lads.
That's
so
all right.
I don't want to keep you too long, but I've got a couple more questions for you. One, I think one of the things you can take away from this conversation is that the working class is not a monolith.
No.
The working class is a variety of interests and views. And one of the inspiring things I think about the trade union movement is mixing, collaborating, people who see politically certainly differently, but coming to an agreed solution and cooperating.
Look, I love all working class people. I've got to say to you, that I've stood on picket lines with people that I politically disagree with to some major degree, right? And I think solidarity and the organisation of working class people has got to be based on what our interests are, not what people think, not whether you like someone's football team or their religious point of view or whatever else.
We've got at least one rep and has taken every day of strike action who's a Conservative councillor. He's an RMG member.
You laugh about
and
that.
he's completely behind the dispute.
No, you laugh about that.
Behind what we're saying here.
He was at our AGM. He's been out on every picket line down at King's Cross. He's a lovely bloke. I'm not going to name him. He's a Conservative councillor. I've stood on picket lines with people from political views extremely different from my own. And that's what real politics is about. It's not about lining up with people and going, you know, you think the wrong thing, therefore you're the wrong person. It's about people getting together and fighting for the issues that affect us all, irrespective of any ideas you might hold in difference.
I couldn't agree with you more. So I would like to know, between the two of you, what your biggest political differences are.
Oh dear, you're going to cause a row here.
Yeah, no, let's go. Let's
Well,
go.
I don't know. I'm the General Secretary, so I'm right.
Here we go then, Eddie.
And then he can have a difference with me.
Well, he's the General Secretary, so I've got to make sure he thinks he's right.
Oh, come on, don't duck it now. Don't duck it now. Don't give me this politician's
I don't
answer
know.
nonsense.
Well, I'm more pragmatic. I'm less inclined to jump in.
Reformist and a social democrat.
I'm a reformist, and I'll tell everyone I'm a reformist. I'm not a revolutionary.
But we're
I don't
similar
wanna
in a
tear
lot of
down the
ways
state.
too.
And by implication,
Well, look.
He's an ex-revolutionary.
I'm an
Formally.
well. But look, let's put it this way. We both hold James Connolly in high esteem. He's just
Yeah.
as someone who's particularly
He was a
important-
revolutionary.
He was a revolutionary. And
Damn
it's
right,
particularly
yeah.
important to both of us being from the backgrounds we're from.
yep.
We have got some slight differences. It's normally about dead Russians, but we won't go into that.
Yeah. I think the dead Russians killed too many Russians. And many people think
This
they
is
didn't kill enough.
this is descending into conversation about communist Russia. So we'll move it on a little bit. I'm not sure that the interest is there more broadly. Light-hearted question for the both of you. What do you do for fun?
Sleep.
Not much of that going
I
around
watch
right
football, I watch the
thank you.
telly, I read books.
Thanks, Ava.
I've got a very regulation life, as they would say in America.
now. You reckon?
Yeah.
I'm a very orthodox person. And yeah, if I get a chance to read a few books
What
on
are
holiday,
you reading at the moment?
I'm reading quite a grim book about the famine. I'm reading another one about the British Empire. So there's a bit of light reading.
Well, I'm pretty much the same. I don't do anything except this. So any downtime I get at all from outside.
Smashing pints
Of what
talking
we
about
do.
dead Russians.
No,
Football.
honestly,
Football
I
is
don't even
what
drink
I
that much. I like to feed the ducks down the park with my beautiful daughters. I've got 3 beautiful daughters, 2 twins and a little baby. I love to spend time with my family and I'll read a bit and that's it.
But the other thing,
That's
my
all the
favourite thing
downtime I
is to
get.
go out with a few mates of mine that I've known for 40 years or more and just have a few pints.
Yeah.
And they're normally saying, not again, don't start all that.
Shut up, Mick.
Shut up,
Stop
Mick.
talking about the dispute.
Yeah. And now they're calling me the dear leader.
I've got 2 more questions. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is our members and the way they've responded to this dispute. You've got to be optimistic in this job. You've got to believe that your ideas have got some basis. So I've got hope in the ideas that I've always believed in. They're not the same as they were when I was 16. They've modified a bit. So that gives me hope, the idea of what we're trying to achieve, but also the response we're getting at the moment. I think there's time for change, and I think the moment is upon us when we can effect long-term change in this society. So I've got a lot of hope going forward.
I'm the same. I've always got faith in working class people. I believe they're always underestimated, sidelined, overlooked. And I think if you get enough working class people together, they've got the intellect, the ideas, the articulation. They've got everything they need to make the change that's required in this country. And like me, I've never been prouder than my members. You've got to appreciate we've got a government against us. We've got some of the biggest multinationals in the world against us. We've got the entire country's media against us. And our members have said, you know what? We're prepared to stand up and bring it on. And as long as they're prepared to stand up, you know, how can you not have hope? I think they're just a beacon of light for everyone else in the country. I'm so proud of them.
Last question. How likely is a general strike this year?
I think it's unlikely, very unlikely.
Really?
Because a general
of course
strike,
it is,
in the
yeah.
terms that Eddie and I might understand it, is called by the TUC
Yeah.
to affect a particular issue. It's probably illegal in most senses. We'd have to work really hard to get a legal opinion. I don't think the TUC will do it. What we will get through things like Enough is Enough, trade union campaign, is generalised approach to it and synchronised, organised industrial action response to what we've got. So generalised, not a general strike.
So
in the traditional
not in the
term.
traditional sense of
Yeah,
the
I
word.
mean, that's becoming a bit of a cliche, the question. I'm not
I didn't
digging
want to
it out, but, you know, general strike, look.
I thought I've done quite well to avoid media cliches during the course.
You've done very well,
Mainly
but
by
I
Our
have to
answer is
say,
if somebody
feeding you
calls it.
Guinness.
Our answer is as
Yeah,
an
if
RNT,
somebody
if
calls it.
somebody calls it, we'll be there. But we can't do it
It's
on
up to
our
the
own.
TUC.
I remember, I'm not as old as Mick, but I'm old
Don't
enough to
hold your
remember.
breath while
No
the
one is.
TUC are calling
We had a
general
motion. Do you remember some years ago, Mick? We had a motion to TUC about organising a general strike, and if you follow that, it ended up as the I Heart Unions campaign. So
strike. Yeah.
whether we get, whether it's called or
stickers.
not, if it's called, we'll support it. But general strike, whatever, grand national holiday, maybe. Who knows?
Generalised collective action, and that's another thing that we're going to work through. What does collective action mean for people
doesn't-
that
it
can't
doesn't have to be
take
walking off the job.
industrial action? So there are millions of non-union people where there's never been a union, but they
Yeah.
may want to join in collective action. we've got to work out what that
we
means for
give 'em
working
that.
people all
Yeah.
across the country. How they can come out and do something to show support for these campaigns. So that's an interesting idea that we've got to develop, and watch out for that as we go forward in the next few weeks.
Eddie Dempsey,
Brother,
thank you.
Cheers,
Mick Lynch,
Whose round is it?
probably still mine. Cheers, boys.
Cheers.
Thanks very much for your time.
cheers.
Good luck.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.
I'm behind here. I've had
Yeah, you bloody are, yeah. That was fantastic, lads. Really, really
I
good.
hope it wasn't too boring.
What was that before?
How often does that happen?
What's
to you
this?
now?
Has Millwall signed a new striker?
Handshake.
All in frame.